Okay, and we're live.
Alrighty. Well, thank you guys for coming. So this is the Towards Openness. Openness? That is what we called, right? Towards Openness. End of 2017 bash, and it's going wild so far. So maybe we just have like a quick intro of everyone who's here, and then we'll just kind of go from here. It's meant to be quite casual, I think, and we'll just see how it goes for the next hour or so. So I guess in short, I'm Kate Green, and I am a PhD student at the moment, working at the University of Nottingham around online health communities. So not really so much in the education scene at the moment, but still very much dipping my toes in when I can. So, you want to go over to Martina?
Okay, I'm Martina Emke. I'm, well, among other things, I'm at the Open University. I'm a doctoral researcher there. And but my interest in openness is very much going across sectors. I also work as a project manager for a government-affiliated organization here in Germany. And to me, openness, as I said, is very, very close to the heart in education. So that's why I'm here.
Great. Brian? And
Hi, Brian Lamb, here in Kamloops, British Columbia, Canada, Thompson Rivers University. This is my colleague, Troy Welch. And I'm here in part because I took part in the Towards Openness workshop at OER 17, which was splendid and has actually really had an impact on a lot of work we've been trying to do since. And also some pretty great conversations at Coventry, as I recall, afterwards. And just really admire the work you're doing. And we just had a little kind of lunchtime ceviche staff party. So we do have the remnants of Paloma's. So if our tequila enhanced rantings end up hijacking your whole session, apologies in advance.
That's what we're looking for.
Tequila, always welcome. And Christian?
Well, hi, I'm Christian. I'm based in Hamburg in Germany. I'm actually in between jobs right now. So I'm taking my last days of vacation at Leuphana University, and I'll be joining Wikimedia Germany next year. I'm also, really looking forward to this conversation because both the sessions and the conversations before and after the sessions around the workshops that we did were kind of highlights of my year so far. Yeah, looking forward to see where we can take this next year.
So I guess that kind of segues nicely. So I thought maybe it'd be nice to talk about sort of a reflection of the year. I mean, Brian and Martina were both in the same session, so it'd be nice to kind of have a bit of a reflection. It's been quite a long time since April, right? So it'd be nice to see where we've come from there, and then we'll probably look at next year and see what we can do from there. So I guess what are the takeaways? What happened and how has it kind of influenced or changed, or what are the best bits?
Do you want to start, Brian? Because you said something about the impact that Towards Openness had on your work, and I would be really interested in hearing what the impact was there.
Sure. So I wrote a blog post that someone from this group was kind enough to repost on the Towards Openness site that talked a little bit about the concept of the intervention. And I don't even know if that was the word that was used in the workshop. It was, but I thought what I find is when we talk about issues of online privacy and the incursions of, kind of very profit-driven, algorithm-driven impulses and kind of the dehumanization of online spaces, just to speak very broadly, of course. It's really easy to feel helpless. And the single, there was a lot I really liked about the workshop, but the thing that I carried out and have been trying to share with other people, perhaps with slightly different vocabulary, is that notion of what is it you can do right now? And to me, that was the core question that was presented to us at the workshop. It's like, it's really easy to sit here and talk about algorithmic decision-making and how it's reinforcing social inequity, and those things need to be examined and explored, and I celebrate everyone who does that kind of work. But I really appreciated just being challenged to say, well, what is it you can do besides just vent about it? And actually, the thing we did at the session ended up being a theoretical construct we couldn't build. But subsequently, in my practice, I've been thinking more and more about smaller, tangible steps. So actually, I think there was a piece that was making the rounds that got written by our provincial educational agency, BC Campus here, which I was a little uneasy about. But just even talking about how the act of getting a consent form filled out by students can be a teaching opportunity. So instead of just treating it as a task where, okay, you're going to use this, you know, you're going to put videos on YouTube, so sign this form so we can do it. You know, explain to them, do you understand what the privacy legislation is? Do you know why it's in place? Do you know what Google does with your data? Do you know how Google makes money? And just having that conversation has actually been some of the highlights of my year here. Because typically 5 to 10 students will come to me after and say, what was that you were saying? Is there more we can learn? What can we look at? And I frequently have pointed them to your website, the Towards Openness site, when I do that. So just that concept of trying not to be paralyzed by the enormity and the terror of what it is we're trying to get our heads around, and the ability, and recognizing too, what I really liked about your workshop was you framed it in such a way that we didn't need to have mastery of the subject to start to act. And I think that's important too, because my sense is a lot of our peers feel like, well, this stuff is so complicated, and if we get out there and really talk about it, we're going to say something stupid sooner or later. And I'm trying to model that, you know, like I'm going to try to say every stupid thing you can in advance to make maybe a little less intimidating for others. But so that was what I took away, was just I really appreciated the opportunity to do rather than complain.
I would like to pick up on that, Brian, because this is the feeling that I got out of the workshop as well. So the sheer enormity of the topic could actually basically kind of stone you, really bury you under a pile of stones. But this is not the sense, this is not the kind of feeling that I think people got from the workshop. It was more the idea of actually, you know, in times of uncertainty and in times of incomplete information, yeah, that's the way it is, full stop. But it's not the point of just sitting here and doing the big literature review and getting down to the bottom, you know, of the theoretical stuff, but really trying to sort of make a change now. And this is what I liked about the workshop. And I happened to sit at the same table that you were at, and most of the time just observing the conversation, just putting in, you know, occasional ideas. But then, of course, the situation was slightly different because you already knew each other, whereas I didn't really know you, not even from Twitter, really. So it was a different situation. But I found it very interesting, and there was immediately this sense of what can we do together? This idea of doing something together, and it wasn't about the outcome. It could have easily just been a kind of, you know, just a drawing or just a plan or but not even a sort of tangible thing. But there was still this sense of sort of urgency. We've got to do something now. Now, because I do not teach students, I actually, my sort of context here is slightly different, because I also work for the European Center for Modern Languages in Graz occasionally, doing workshops there. And so my students, so to speak, my participants are actually teachers. And we are doing workshops in the area of teacher development and using computers in the classroom and all that comes with it. So my take was slightly differently. So I couldn't actually go back to a university and then say, okay, I apply that in my teaching. For me, something else was really more interesting here, and this is what I took from the Towards Openness workshop very heavily, was the idea of what can I do actually to sort of bridge Twitter, well, not Twitter networks, bridge networks of open education practitioners, communities or networks there. And you might remember that there was a lot of talk at the OER 17 conference about the German federal government having heavily invested into the OER movement here in Germany. And one of the things that they basically invested in was actually building these networks here in Germany. Now, my concern was that it gets a bit of, German-centric network, just looking at what's going on in higher education and in all the other educational sectors here in Germany, and trying to sort of push the OER movement there, but not looking across the border. And so my concern really has been, what can we do to actually sort of connect these different networks, the different groups and communities there. And we actually started recording a virtually connecting session at the OER 17. So Christian was there, and Jöran, he's one of the sort of I don't want to use the word leading figures, but he is certainly somebody in a central position, talking from a social network analysis point of view. So he's very central to the OER movement here in Germany. And he recorded us, and then we used that as a kind of tool for making virtually connecting more popular here in Germany, as a way, for me at least, this was the purpose, to actually reach out and connect to OER networks, in the UK, for instance, but also in Canada or in North America, and other networks as they emerge. And I think this is something that I took out from there and that I've been working on with the. In Hamburg, we had an opportunity to use virtually connecting, and at the OER festival here in Germany towards the end of November as well. So this is something that I immediately took away, and where I thought I could actually sort of really do something, because I totally agree with what you said before. It's not just about sitting there and doing and thinking, but it's actually the doing there.
So it's interesting if you connect those two. For me, was that the kind of the level of preparation that you usually put into a session at a conference or a workshop was well exceeded by what we did over the year for the Towards Openness workshops, at least for what I usually do. So not lots of people like build a website or pre-record stuff and stuff like that. And both of your points really resonated with me, because what we were kind of hoping to achieve with that was achieved in both ways, right? So for you, Brian, you had a resource to point people to, you had a point of reference to point people towards to. It's not storyfied, so we decide when it's online and offline. It's something that can be reused for other purposes. I know that Maha, who wanted to be here tonight too, used some of the provocations we had. I know that the provocation by Chris Gilliard we had was used even at OER 17, but in lots of other contexts as well. And so to contribute to that building of a resource of some extent, that also defines some kind of actionable chunks, if in an ideal world at least, but also to connect the people around the issues, and not only the issues, but also the communities that form around these different issues, because people tend to, well, ignore that and just put on those blind sides and just ignore whatever is happening beyond national borders. I mean, we have some great examples for that if we're talking about a Year Roundup, but also in more discipline-driven ways of thinking about this. So if we champion open and interdisciplinary and all that, then I really like this approach, to be honest. But I also, just to add to that, because I think we can get there at lots of things that we're doing already. I also find it kind of hard to explain to people what it is they'll actually be doing in a workshop and what will actually come out of that. And I think that's something that we need to get better at, for example, and also maybe provide different entry points to these communities, to these resources, to these spaces that we kind of claim there. So kind of to put another drift on it and to think about what it is that we might be doing better next year is to think about those different levels of entry somehow. That's kind of what I'd like to do, at least partially.
Yeah, we were just before we went live, I think it was just the two of us, that the OEB conference, because this is the second Towards Openness sort of style that we've done at that conference, and because it's so, I mean, I've not personally attended either of them, only virtually, but because it's such a commercial conference, it kind of presents an opportunity and also a challenge when it comes to talking about openness, because obviously they're talking about LMSs and online learning and very much commercially driven. And so they're the kind of people you want to speak to about these issues, right? Because if we have these collective concerns, and then speaking to the people who are either designing or could influence the design of the infrastructures, then that could be a great opportunity. But as Christian rightly says, when you have a group of people in the room who aren't really sure what they're about to kind of experience, and then kind of hit them with this big openness sort of hammer, and then it kind of creates a sort of awkwardness. I don't know. I found that both of the OEB, I mean, like I said, wasn't at either of them, but they've kind of had like a really strange tension in them. And I'm not sure why that is, whether it's just because of the context of that conference, but I would like to kind of replay the whole theme and that workshop with a different audience or a different kind of group of people, because the provocations were really great. So I don't know whether Brian and Martina, you had a look at what it was for the one in Berlin. When was it? Just a few weeks ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
But essentially the provocateurs were asked to talk or to basically describe how they would purposefully design to marginalize, not to create bridges, but to burn them. And the provocations were great. I mean, we had, well, Mary didn't quite do it. She just explained what, she didn't actually do it, which is great because she didn't follow instructions. But she, so she's from Uganda, but she was talking about the issues with inequality, that women or girls don't have a great education because they leave school, not because of the school, but because of personal things, like not being able to, if they don't have access to sanitary towels and those sorts of things, so they leave school because they're embarrassed, or they're married off, so then they don't have an education. All these barriers that we don't think about in our societies, in our context, and she just brought it in there, and I was just like, whoa, I was completely blown away. And then we had subsequent ones which were very much kind of talking about, you know, what they would do to exclude people, and yeah, and I've just thought, like, these are really great, like, resources to really make you think. And I was kind of hoping that I'd get a little bit more out of that workshop, but these things are new. But I guess Christian can probably explain a bit more about how that went, and maybe, yeah.
And sorry, not to make you linger on the most uncomfortable part, but I'm sorry, that's what I'm interested in. Did you get anything like pushback? Like, you seem to be kind of politely saying you didn't get quite the momentum out of the discussion you're hoping for. I hope I'm not mischaracterizing what you said. I'm just trying to actually get a sense what happened when you delivered the session.
I mean, Christian's probably better to answer this, but I think in the first one, didn't people leave? Like, as soon as you said
sorry for laughing too loudly, maybe. So what you have to know about OEB, I think, is, well, the conference itself can be characterized quite well, I think, if you just claim, or if you just state that it has been sold one day before it actually took place. So it's a yearly conference, and it was bought by another conference organizer from London, I think. It is one of the most expensive EdTech conference, and it's more like on the tech side of things. So you have people like Mark Pransky, and then those more Silicon Valley leaning folks on panels claiming that Facebook is great for education, and people clap. That's the one thing.
So it's a hell of a you're saying.
So, yeah, it is.
Sorry, it isn't? And you're telling me now? Facebook is not good for education, you're saying?
Yeah, I heard something like that. I would point you to provocations from both our workshops on that. No, but It's very vendor driven. Even though it's the most expensive conference, you can't go to a session without being harassed by some LMS provider or proctoring provider. So in that way, it's a very, and I don't mean to disrespect anybody from North America, but it is something that you would, I personally have only experienced outside of OEB in like the more North American context, if you see what I mean. It's very, yeah. So that's that. Then it's usually that people are more receptive than prepared to interact. So they're more in that mode, which is something that doesn't really work if we have a 2-hour slot and get to do stuff. And it is just a conference where controversy is not, or criticality even, is not really fostered in that way. So we had kind of this it almost felt like Alcoholics Anonymous when I met for lunch with Paul Prinsloo and one or two other folks, and you would just sit there and look at each other and just moan, right?
I think you people are incredibly brave. The thing is, I mean, you know, if you go to such a conference, where it's not really a conference in the first place, it's a big marketplace, and the idea here is to make money. I think it's more about the commercial aspect than anything else. Simple as that. And I think I would have expected that you find, or I would expect that you find people there who are prepared to humor you in terms of openness and talking about education, as long as it serves their purposes to some end. But if they can't see any sense in that, then obviously they go to other people where the chances are better to actually sell their product. Simple as that. So I think in those terms, I think you, as I said, you're incredibly brave, because it's a completely different, not just audience, but also the whole atmosphere is completely different from what we experienced at the OER 17, where to be honest, in my mind, there was sometimes almost too much of an, oh, aren't we great feeling, and not enough controversy, because there were a lot of people there. You know, you talk about, you know, really controversial issues, and there was always a point where we said, yes, we can all agree on that. We can all agree on that, and yes, we are the people who are at the forefront of, you know, basically this open movement, this OER movement. And so I think that at the OEB, I suppose it was a completely different experience, obviously, for obvious reasons then.
Yeah, and I think both places are bubbles, right? So the OER conference is a very comfy, feel home kind of bubble. And so is OEB for lots of people, I guess, just not me. And the audience of our workshop was a really, OEB has somewhat around, I think, 2,000 attendees. And our workshop on site at the beginning had, let's say, 30 people. And I like it when people like sneak into your workshop for 5 or 10 or 15 minutes or a session, and then just leave if they find that it's not for them. I'm all okay with that. So having 5 or 6 or 7 people leave is just like what I expect, basically, if I'm not at OERs. But I remember the last year in 2016 when we did our first workshop at OEB, I think half the people left after the provocations, which is just as much as I was hoping to get out of this. This time they left during the provocations, which I guess, considering that this topic is kind of a hot button issue for some, it can also be a good thing. Like, you can't say we did it right if we got people to leave, I guess.
You provoked them.
It might be.
Martina said so many interesting things. First of all, I've been meaning to say since her first comment that I just have to apologize again for the misfortune that she ended up at a table where both Jim Grew and myself were at the same time. Because my friend Troy knows what that would mean. And yeah, sorry you didn't get to participate more. That just happens, and I'm sorry. But the thing about OER 17 feeling maybe a little too comfortable and a little too self-affirmative, I can totally get why someone would feel that way. Because I was someone who felt incredibly comfortable at that event and really luxuriated in that comfort. Because I'm kind of reminded about how some activists and political movements will talk about like a street protest, that there's kind of two purposes to a protest. One, which rarely actually happens, is a show of strength, you know, hitting the streets, getting the news, setting the agenda, you know, things like that. But long-term activists usually view street protests as having a different purpose, which is really just affirmation for the people who go to the meetings and community center basements and you know, and hit the streets and try to get, you know, signatures on petitions, and who generally don't get a lot of affirmation for that kind of work. And that you know, a street protest is like a gathering where you get to look around and realize you're not alone. And that was, and it says something about the state of our field right now, that what was a fairly mainstream conference would feel that way, but it did for me. So if I seemed like a Kool-Aid drinker at that event, that certainly was the Kool-Aid I was drinking, was that sense that there was a group of people at this event that were looking at these things outside the lens of the next big deal. Because we were actually talking about that at the meeting we had just before this one. People were asking me about, oh yeah, so publishers and OER, like they're against it, right? And I said, well, no, not actually. If you look at Pearson's website or Cengage's, they all have an OER initiative of one kind or another. Now, what that initiative is means something else. Not to ramble too much, but yeah, Martina, you've raised a lot of interesting points. I think the nature of our community is really interesting for the people, because we all have an obligation to kind of move our positions forward and to work within institutions and to make connections and have good, legitimate, solid projects. And then there's the stuff that's kind of in our hearts. And I guess what I liked about OER 17 was that felt like an event that felt a little bit more geared to our hearts rather than our career paths. Maybe I'm over romanticizing. In fact, I know I am as I'm hearing myself.
I also think that OER 17 kind of came after the terrible year of 2016. So I think everyone kind of felt quite hopeless, right? Especially the guys from North America who were just feeling super hopeless. And then obviously Brexit, so everyone felt terrible. But yeah, I kind of know what you mean. I think everyone kind of came together. We just kind of had a big group hug. And it was really nice. And I mean, that was actually the first OER I've been to. And even though I don't know like a huge amount in the community, I did feel really kind of comfortable and at home. Like I just, like doing the workshop, I just kind of, you know, just let you get on with it. Like there's no facilitating here to be done. It just seemed like a nice crowd. And again, while that can make really great things happen, like, you know, all of the stuff that came out of that workshop that we did was so great. And I mean, I think I can just point to that and say that's one of the best things that happened this year. But then, like you say, we need to kind of go in between these bubbles, right? So we need to, I mean, it's great what you're saying, Brian, that you're actually taking some of this stuff away and speaking to your students, but we need to be like engaging our colleagues a bit more, right? I mean, I don't know whether Towards Openness is maybe, I don't know, like a space or I don't know, like a thing we can use, and whether, you know, we don't need to do conference workshops all the time. We can, you know, just have a workshop with our colleagues. I don't know whether Towards Openness it could be used for that. I don't know, but I'm just thinking, how do we kind of, you know, if our action is let's do something, then could we do something in our own smaller bubbles and not have such a showy thing? I don't know. I'm just kind of thinking out loud, clearly.
So if I'm like looking at the two statements that you, Brian, and Martina had in the beginning, what you took away from the workshop, my feeling is that both purposes or goals, aims, whatever you might call them, can be probably achieved a bit easier if we go to feel-good conferences like OER and do a workshop and have a collaborative group thing where people just work together and something nice and interesting comes out of it, like with your group, Brian, and lots of others at OER 17. Whereas at OEB 17, it's more a confrontative kind of thing, right? And there it is really about reaching people on site or even virtually in Kate's case, but not as much about it's never about the end product, but about while the OER thing was more a collaborative process towards building something, the OEB thing seemed more like a process towards confronting somebody. And in both cases, this workshop had its use somewhat, right? But if you, Brian, were looking for something to point people to, you'd probably choose the one where people were actually working together and build something more or less tangible that you can point people to who are quote unquote new to this, right? So you would want something that people can relate to more easily than a confrontative conversation or something like that.
I'd see value in both. I mean, I'm not trying to disagree with you, but some of my most memorable experiences were actually at events where people weren't getting it, and it felt confrontational and not nice. But then it's weird. At those ones tend to be where the real bonding happens. The 3 or 4 people that you kind of went through this together with, you're kind of together forever. And actually, when I look at my most enduring relationships in this field over the last decade or so, we usually had a couple train wrecks. And it was usually along the lines of, being in a place where the audience really wasn't quite receptive or ready for what we were talking about. At least on the open stuff, it seems like the arrow or narrative has shifted in our favor. And there's other ways in terms of like the indie web where it feels like the narrative's shifted away. So, but those, I don't know. I mean, I hope everyone on this call and anyone watching this, so hopefully, people aren't going to drift away and stop doing this work in a year or two. So if we're going to do this for a number of years, we're going to need to find ways to sustain ourselves and feel like it's worth doing, even when it kind of wobbles, because it's not going to, because if it was just this obvious, really easy path, then it would have happened already. I mean, we are kind of swimming against a predominant tide that's better financed and has big organizational weight behind it. And there's still fun to be had, and I think it's important to celebrate those bits too. So some of it is funny stories about an event where people were walking out, and I'm sorry if I was laughing too hard at it. That was out of recognition. Like, I knew exactly what you were doing, and what, even though I'm going to watch those OEB provocations. I'm ashamed to say I missed them when they came out. But yeah, I know exactly what that feels like. But oddly enough, some of those experiences, when I look back over the last decade, often actually ended up having more substantial impact than the ones where we were celebrated.
No, just to add to that, please do laugh at that, and I'll laugh with you, because as soon as I start doing a session or a workshop at a conference like OEB and nobody walks out, then I know I'm in the right place, and that's where I don't want to be. Just to make that point.
Getting back to your question, what can we do next year? What can we sort of focus on? Where do we need to tie the strings? Where can we let strings loose, so to speak? What I'm wondering about is, with the idea of openness and open education all over the place, I think it's important to be very critical who speaks about openness and what is their purpose. And I think this ties in very well with what you just said about the OEB. I think there are some people around for whom it makes sense to use the idea of openness and open education and OERs as long as it serves their purposes. And I think we are at a sort of critical stage now where we have to look behind the discourses and find out what people really mean when they use openness. for their own purposes. And I think this is what I think is at least for me will be more important next year. So whenever somebody says, actually, yeah, isn't it great, you know, with the EU and open education and yes, and OERs and the textbooks get cheaper and, you know, everybody's happy, we have more equity and more participation and all the rest. I think it makes sense to sort of dissect that and to look at the people who actually say it's not important anymore that it is being said and it is being taken up in certain circles. I think it's more important who says it now and what sort of what the people mean by this and what a person means by talking about openness and opening up education, opening up higher education maybe. And then trying to find the one angle where you can actually sort of connect and then try to achieve something together that really means openness. And I think this might be something where Towards Openness can make a huge contribution because you already have this site. You have your website now, which has a lot of resources, but also can serve as a kind of sort of meeting point, informal meeting point. I'm not sure it's the right word, meeting point, but where people actually go to and then say, for instance, oh, right, I would like to basically have my own symposium, or I've got an opportunity to do something at my university or at my workshop or whatever. Where can I find a person that sort of that I can connect with and that comes in as a remote participant maybe, and we can do something really, you know, use a particular action that is planned anyway, and then try to sort of sneak in the openness topic and sort of almost hijack an event and use it to promote true openness. And I was thinking that this might actually be a way to go. And maybe even picking up on what Brian said earlier on about the two sides of going on the street and doing the street action there. And I'm talking here about the more subversive side, not the comfy side. It's the more the sort of revolutionary, you know, side. But not in a big way, not in a big mouth way, more in a more silent but more determined way, and looking for ways to sort of use existing actions, use existing conferences maybe, and trying to sort of sneak in and using these events to promote real openness. And as I said, maybe your website, the Towards Openness website, with its resources, with its provocations that already exist, maybe that could be repurposed and used in that context as well. I was thinking, instead of always creating new, maybe sort of, you know, repurposing, mixing, very much in the OER sense as well, if you understand what my ramblings are all about.
No, that's really good. I think Christian's just put into the kind of chat thing the original drivers of openness, which was it Sean as well?
Yeah, we co-facilitated with Sean. The original proposal was by Nishant, me, Ann-Kathrin, and Mariam, former colleagues of mine, I think. So, but basically, what I said in the chat was basically that quite often when, especially now that and I think both of you kind of hinted at that this mainstreaming of open is kind of happening now, right? So this, and people are taking that term, and some speak of open washing, some of open wrapping, and what helps me is to take a look at this original proposal, which is still kind of rough and not really fleshed out, and I'm pretty sure you could rephrase some stuff of that, but looking at those drivers of openness and to see where you can actually, where you might have leverage with a certain idea. So this one thing might work on an administrative or governance level, this might think on pedagogy or content or infrastructure. And I think it might make sense. So when you think about these 5 or 6 drivers of openness, and if you think about remixing and reshuffling resources, and if you think like if we had a bit more resources in terms of provocations if we had spent more time probably in collecting the resources that we have from other websites and from other talks and all that kind of stuff. And if we try to, like in the back of my head, even though I'm neither a visually nor technically talented person, there's this kind of matrix model where you have those 5 drivers where you have different entry points to open, you have different outcomes of open, you have different processes of open, you have different content and so forth. And to have this kind of Rubik's Cube that you can still shuffle around, and at some point it will make sense. And this, I think this kind of goes back to the session that you, Brian, had at OER 17, because I'm now talking about something that I'm not going to be able to build tonight. So, but I think that's like the ideal, one of the ideal outcomes from my perspective, at least, to have one of those, to not even be one of those nodes, just be one website that tries to make sense of this stuff together with others and for others. And if workshops contribute to that, that's good. If there's different stuff or other stuff, then that's even better.
You said so many smart things there, Christian, but I'm just going to jump on that. You don't need my approval. But I did want to really underline that last thing you said, because I got a text message from a friend of mine who had seen a concept that she had developed, and it got not appropriated, but it got reworked by someone who was more prominent. And this person used different terminology, and then kind of relaunched it and got more feedback than she had ever gotten. And first of all, I understand how that feels. When you come up, either you take an idea and you articulate it well, or maybe you come up with an idea. I don't think I've ever come up with an idea, but sometimes you just frame it in a way that you feel good about, and then you put it out there and people like it. And it seems to be building a little momentum. And then somebody way more prominent than you, or with more power or whatever, kind of takes that idea and then restates it, and then suddenly gets way more impact than you could ever have imagined. We watched this. If you look at the open ed community, if you look at like the blogging community in open ed, like when MOOCs happened, that's exactly how everyone felt. It was like, we've been talking about this for years, and then a big corporate entity comes in, takes these concepts, takes out the parts that are inconvenient, and then now the Chronicle of Higher Education and the Times are all talking about it.
Never mind the Canadians.
Yeah. And anyway, I mean, but I guess, like, it was weird because when I was speaking to this friend of mine, I wanted to commiserate with her because I know how that feels, and she isn't terribly prominent, so she deserves more attention, and she has really good ideas, and it would benefit all of us if her ideas got more traction and were distributed more widely. But part of me also wanted to go, oh, this just happens all the time. And something I certainly have tried to wean myself off of is to not get too worked up about those things. And it's easier for me to say because I'm at a certain point in my life. I have a steady paycheck and a good job and things like that. And if it's someone who's a graduate student or someone in a precarious employment situation, that's different. Anyway, but I appreciated, just to jump on that last point you made, Christian, I think sometimes we get a little competitive with our ideas, and sometimes I see people fighting about really small distinctions. And unfortunately, I think it is pushed on us by the precarity of our employment. We're all having to go to that next job, and when this contract ends or this grant ends, what are we going to do next? And it creates a certain dynamic. Anyway, I'm kind of rambling off there, but I just wanted to applaud you because I think a lot of the best stuff you've done probably has been happening in a second degree level. And And it works that way for a lot of people, I think.
Can I just say something to that? Two things. First of all, I agree, Brian, that precarity makes a bad fellow in the sense that it brings out the worst in people. But to me, the more important point is actually just sort of decent behavior. And I would expect people to behave decently, whether they work with me in a project as a project manager, or whether they do research with me or whatever. And I think it's not, I mean, if this person, this friend of yours gets mentioned, that's okay. I mean, it could even work for her or his advantage in the sense that if somebody more prominent with more followers, with a louder voice, can actually, you know, pick up on that idea and maybe even, you know, give his 2 cents or her 2 cents to it and then turn it into something bigger, then eventually part of the, you know, the spotlight will also shine on the person who originally came up with the idea in the first place. So it could even work in that way. It doesn't necessarily have to be very competitive and very bad. But I think it starts with the person picking up from somebody else, just acknowledging, just saying, thank you. By the way, you know, I heard this and this person mentioned it. Thank you. That's it. Maybe nothing more. But I miss this basic decency sometimes in the discourse. And I think we are making lives unnecessarily hard for ourselves and for other people if we forget this little thank you, nothing else. I think it's not always about, you know, becoming the next big guy or lady or whatever in the discussion. And I think for a lot of people, it's not about that. Because I think for a lot of people, and this is going back to what you said about the heart, talking to the heart there, it's really a passion. It's a strong belief, it's a passion, and it's something that goes right through your heart and through your bone and runs in your blood. And that is strong, and that is really strong. And these people you identify with, and these people, when you meet them in the street and you talk to them, you have something that connects you. And that is very strong, and that goes over the ego and everything else. 2 cents.
I think it's probably worth kind of bringing back into the kind of the loop that Towards Openness is something that Chris and I do on the side. Like, it really doesn't take loads of our time. We probably like chat on Slack, which we've kind of hijacked a Slack that isn't have anything to do with Towards Openness. We use the Virtually Connecting Slack channel, and we just kind of chat in there. And I think we don't spend a huge amount of time talking about Towards Openness, but now and then we kind of think of something and we're like, oh yeah. But then obviously our jobs and what we do kind of comes back forth. So I guess that's a sort of reflection and thinking about whether maybe Towards Openness one day might be picked up and recognized. But I feel so humble about how it is right now. Like, it's nice. I think it's about how I could describe it. And that it is low key, and while we do want to, you know, shake things up a little bit, if we just do it sort of, you know, one person at a time, and then we make small impacts, but we have an impact. So the OER 17, you know, it's just, we have two of you here, and Brian's gone away and he's spoken to how many students, and how many of them come back to you? That one person's made a huge impact from a project that we don't spend a huge amount of time working on, in all honesty. So I still feel I think that's a huge win as far as I'm concerned. If everybody went away and had even the smallest of impact, and even if that is, oh yeah, let's use Chris Gideon's provocation again. I mean, I think that's such a big win for a small project. And to be honest, if someone came over to us and said, I want to pay you or whatever, I'd probably say no, because I think it would take, you know, the heart out of what we're doing. I mean, yeah, it would be great if we could spend a little bit more time on it, get more provocations, talk about some of the other drivers of openness. I think we talk a lot about privacy, which, although I'm fine with, I think there are definitely other barriers and things we need to be talking about. And I think that's one of the things I'd like to look at next year. But yeah, it's really interesting to hear what you're both saying about sort of the competitiveness and people giving, you know, credit to where it's due. But yeah, I think that's quite a nice sort of way for me to think about this year when we had 2 workshops, and I feel quite humbled by both of them for different reasons.
So Kate, if you could forgive me barging in here, because I've been wondering this for a while before even today's session. Because I remember, say, 10, 12 years ago, some of the work that I was involved with that I was most proud of, I actually got in trouble for. And it really helped me in terms of my day-to-day job. I think in long term it helped me, but in terms of connecting with people, that mattered a lot, and really sustained me over the years. So I'm just curious. You partially answered this question in advance, Kate, so I'm not asking you to repeat yourself, but like, has this been a good thing for you and Christian? Like, has this been noticed, and when it's been noticed, has it helped you? Like, has it been a good thing in your career paths?
Towards openness, do you mean?
Yeah, the work you've been doing on this.
I mean, it's really interesting actually, because when we first all got together to talk about towards openness, when what we were talking about is really not what it's turned into, I was sort of sneaking my way out of my previous job into meetings in Germany about it. So I always felt quite undercover about it, which is ironic since it's about openness, and I was being really sneaky about what I was doing. But then I left my job. So, and yeah, I mean, I speak.
Both changed jobs recently, or somewhat recently.
Sorry?
So you and Christian have both changed jobs somewhat recently. That's partly our math. Like, was it a good thing when you would this come up, and when it did, was it a good thing?
I think so. I mean, it's having something that's small and present all the time. It's something that you can kind of come back to and say, yeah, I'm working on this. And it's great when you come to conversations with people, especially now when talking about the internet and things. And a lot of the time people kind of worked up on problems that I don't really see as issues. And I can kind of point to towards openness for loads of different reasons. That's like specifically talking about problems or issues around education. And then other stuff like, bring people together on a virtual call. So when I was in Los Angeles for the Internet Society Awards thing that I went to in September, there's a couple of people who couldn't come. And then I said, well, obviously we'll just ring them like during the conference, because that's the thing you do, right? And because that's the kind of culture that this is all part of. It seems super normal, but everyone's like, wow, this is amazing. I was like, oh, well, okay. So I kind of feel like projects like these, and particularly towards openness, it kind of is giving me a lot of experience with how you can connect people around stuff. I think giving people something to look at and talk about is such a great way of like kind of designing anything, really. Like, even since I went to a school, I'm going to another school next year. I'm going to do the whole school around internet safety and security. God help me. So it's going to be one person and 800 people, and they're all going to be in different rooms. But the way that I'm designing it is exactly the same model as towards openness: provocation and a big old chat, because that's all you need when it comes to these big problems, these big complex issues that we have. Is that you can't be taught them. We just got to talk about them and think, what can we do next, and what can we do? So. Yeah, I don't know if that was really answering your question at all, but yeah, it's definitely helped.
I would just add to everything that Kate said, which was obviously something that, relates to me, but also just that last bit that you said, Kate, about having a space where you talk about the big, hairy, messy issues and problems. So lots of places help me in that way, right? So I might be a bit more quiet than I usually am, because I just got done recording a 2-hour podcast in German. Martina is one of the more or less frequent listeners, I think. Conversations like these, conversations around towards openness, conversations you can have on, I don't know, virtually connecting or wherever you find them, helps you, because you're somewhat forced, or you're given the space to talk and tackle about issues. It kind of forces you to think differently about the issue itself. And in that moment, you get better at articulating it. At that moment, you get better at understanding it and framing it. And at that moment you'll be better at putting it into that 90-second, 120-second soundbite that you need in order to, I don't know, do a good job at your job, for example, where you very often have to convince someone of something in just very limited time. So I think it helped me as well. But what it really did, apart from like that content side, I think it also helps me connect with people. And that goes back to what you said in the very beginning, Martina. It helps me connect with people who I usually wouldn't be in touch with, right? So we're talking to two Canadians now who have tequila during lunch, I think. It must be lunch, right? There it is. So this whole the connection and learning from one another in those spaces then again is an experience that not lots of people have when they, I don't know, work in a 50% position at some public university in northern Germany's province. So sure, it helps, yeah. And at least half of that is just the preparation, the thinking, who are you going to ask for a provocation? What would they probably say? How would you then be able to frame it? Who might be nice to follow up on that and stuff like that, right? Because, I was really happy with the way, for example, the OEB 17 provocations came together in the end, but I was also quite anxious whether that would work out because those are not people that you would usually hear from at OEB 17 especially. And learning about that and pushing that is interesting. Just in terms of what we might be doing next year or over the next couple of months and at conferences. So there have been some, I think some opportunities where we're still waiting to see if the workshops are actually going to come through. This is also something that really might work out and might put a different spin on things. But like what is actually something that I would like to think about more a bit over the next couple of days is what is it that where we can actually keep that learning curve, so to speak, while we're still doing something that enables both, like, and I'm just going to point at you because the two of you are here, enables Brian to talk to more colleagues and students, but enables Martina to, I don't know, connect with more people outside of her original community, while we still keep doing what we're doing and keep, while we're still, I don't know, learning all of that and getting better at that. And I think that's what I like about Towards Openness in the end, is that it feeds into those different purposes. Yeah, and I don't have a question, an answer to that. It's just an open question.
I have something to say, but I feel like I should give Katrina or Martina a chance to talk.
No, I was just thinking that we usually don't just have one role, Christian. So yes, I'm project manager here in Germany, but also doctoral researcher and somebody who works for the European Center for Modern Languages. And these are three very different sides of work that I have there. And I really like to make the connections there as well. And so a lot of the things that I saw at the Towards Openness workshop that I attended, for instance, I took to other discourses as well. And it led to a number of interesting conversations, not least during the OER 17 and also later on at the OER festival here in Germany, and also inspired some of the virtually connecting work that I've been doing with you. So what I really like is not just, we are not, it allows us to actually make the connections also within the different sort of roles that we have. And then in whatever role we find ourselves in, then really use what we have been given and what we have jointly achieved so far, and build on that and try to use the situation to promote openness. And that's what I meant earlier on when I talked about the, you know, the blood and the bone and the hard thing.
And since you asked, I would ask you to not think so much about what you think people like me might think. I think what I really enjoyed about your work was that it felt really fresh and distinct, and it felt like it came from your interests and your observations. We've used terms like open washing and things like that. There's a certain kind of process washing that happens where you try to make your work more respectable and you try to make it fit into like what conferences expect and meet certain expectations. And usually what it ends up doing is just diluting what you do. I think what you're doing is marvelous, and I would just encourage you, if anything, push harder and care less about what people think.
Yes, I would like to support that, and also say keep it rough, keep it rough, keep it raw, and don't try to sort of polish it in any way, because I think this is the interesting thing there. Sort of pushing people out of their comfort zones, especially when you go to a lot of conferences, and I haven't been to that many conferences, but the ones I've been to, and also big ones, they tend to have the same kind of atmosphere, and there's a certain expectation as to what people will deliver, and then you find yourself sitting there and you're watching for these points, and if they don't come up, you feel irritated. You go like, oh, where is the purpose of this all? So what's in the data, and why didn't you do that, and why didn't you, you know, that sort of thing. But at the same time, when I find myself sitting in the audience and listening to some of these papers, I think to myself, this is the sort of other side of the brain or whatever that says, why are you feeling this way? Why don't you appreciate the novelty and the slightly unusual things that are going on here? And your workshop in that sense was in itself was a very good provocation. And you didn't, you know, I remember that there was one person in the audience who actually said, so what is the structure? What do you want us to do? What is the sort of outcome? How are we supposed to go about this? You know, I need more structure, I need more guidance here. And you were very relaxed, both of you. I remember I had this sort of picture in my head. I feel this situation very vividly at the moment. You were very calm and collected, and you were going like, you know, there is no structure. There is, in the sense that we know what we're doing, obviously, but there is also this, we allow for uncertainty here. We allow for unpredictability here, because this is what this workshop is all about. And it was marvelous. And I would hope to see that you keep this format next year as well.
I think it's fair to say that we're going to keep things rough and relaxed. I don't think that's going to change at all. But I really like these online chats. I think we had one, was it after OER 17? Was it that one, the missed conversation? That was such a good session. I think we were chatting for like well over an hour, and we could have kept going. And we were like, let's stop. But I'll be really interested, because instead of waiting for the next conference or something, maybe we should just have, you know, a few more chats like these. If there's only 4 people, that's fine. Like, more the merrier. But, you know, maybe something that's just even more rough, that we might have something that we look at and then we just go and chat. I mean, it's still the same thing, right? But yeah, but speaking of running over an hour, I think we probably just be bedtime for Christian, right? Maybe.
Sorry, I didn't get the last part. I already heard my name.
Never mind then. So yeah, so just to kind of wrap this up, I just want to say a huge thank you to Brian and Martina, and obviously to Christian as well. Christian's just been an absolute hero when it comes towards openness. He's way more organised than I am, I've got to say, which is weird because I feel like I'm quite organised, but he's on it. And thank you for participating this year. Thank you for coming to this, and for some good sort of advice for us to go into next year. I think we're really looking forward to so I don't know, Christian, you wanted to add anything to the thank yous, but
Well, just another huge thank you for, on the one hand, attending, but also for the feedback. I think it helps us. It provides just another, the last, I don't know, 10 minutes or so provided another, how would you say that? A layer of comfort, so to speak, in what it is we do, in terms of like just going at it and then just see where it ends up with, and not to think about what it might actually be used for in the end. So that will most certainly stick with me over the holidays, and we'll see where we take that in terms of organizing as well.
Any final comments from you guys, or should we wrap this up?
I can't refuse an opportunity to talk, but I will just say I really want to thank all of you. You gave a session that was actually meaningful to me, that was useful to me. I refer back to the resources that you've been making available. And like I said before in my last comment, I just hope you'll keep doing what you do without worrying too much about the broader field, because I think you're more interesting for the most part than the broader field. And just follow that thing that you guys are already following. Please do it. It'll make me happy.
I haven't been known for providing a layer of comfort to people, and I don't want to do this in this session. So, so basically, I just leave it at what Brian just said about the thank you. It's been a great pleasure working with you, and I would like to be part of whatever you're doing next year as well, if and as you see fit to use me. Towards openness purposes. And apart from that, I wish you a Merry Christmas and a happy and healthy New Year.
All right, so I'll leave it at that. I'll stop the broadcast. Thank you both again for the feedback and taking the time. And I'll hit the button and we should be off in any